Well, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. It's back to work. Fall is in the air. It's past Labor Day. I'm Harry Brailsford from SMB Nation. It's high noon on the West Coast. It's 3 p.m. on the East Coast, early evening over in Europe. And as we always say, very, very early morning over in Asia. So if you're attending from Australia, thank you very much. A little bit of housekeeping up front as always. First of all, if I could have everybody mute in the background, appreciate that. Second of all, we have the Tour de Cloud coming up. So again, a little bit of housekeeping. The Tour de Cloud is coming up in just a few weeks. The URL for that is Tour de Cloud. And I was just in, Jenny, I don't know if you know this, I was just in a 6 a.m. breakfast meeting in Redmond with some members of the Azure team. They're here for training, and they're on East Coast time, so they wanted to meet at 6 a.m. for breakfast out here in Redmond, and we did some final preparations for the tour. So Azure Office 365 and other content. With that said, that's the main news. We have the weekly webinar schedule continuing and so on. Let's jump right into it. We are talking about ransomware, eradicating downtime and ransomware, simply, quickly, and affordability with Infoscale, a old friend of the family. Chris, let's go to the next slide so I can introduce both me and you. So for those of you that aren't familiar with SMB Nation, again, Harry Brailsford, love to have you click over and link up. And I'm going to tell you why on LinkedIn. If you look at my lead story at smbnation.com over in, I believe it's the Start Over category on the main web page, I have a Easter egg for LinkedIn where you can globally download your contacts or your connections instead of going one by one through screens. And more importantly, you get a lot of people's back email addresses. They use their back email for their LinkedIn account. So that's a very cool little trick. So link up with me and link up with as many people as you can. Chris and I go back a couple of opportunities, Chris, I would offer, and it was nice to see you pop up at Infoscale. So, sir, introduce yourself. Hopefully people are looking at your LinkedIn profile, too. How's it going today?
Excellent, Harry. Thinking back, I think we may have met back in maybe 06 or 07, back in the Untangled days, so this goes back a ways.
Sir.
Also, just to reaffirm your plug for the Tour de Cloud, I heartily recommend that. I hope everyone takes advantage of that.
There we go. So you're at Infoscale, sir. You're the SVP of Sales, and what are we going to talk about today? Maybe we should just pop right over to the offers, incentives, prizes, and agenda. There you go.
Exactly. So before we dive into the agenda, I just want to let everyone know that's attending. We really encourage lots of good questions and dialogue and participation. And we're going to select a winner based on the most engaged and best questions, and you'll get their choice of an Xbox 360, Apple TV, or a Pardot drone, which seem to be all the rage these days. So make sure you either email your questions here or type them into the chat box so that we can capture those. And we'll tackle as many as we can at the end of the session. All right. So the agenda today, we're going to cover a few different things. I want to talk a little bit about disaster recovery. It's been an interesting and evolving space through the years, and we'll take a look at some of that. Ransomware, which has kind of recently emerged onto the scene as one of the causes of disasters. And it seems to be in the news almost every day, and we'll take a look at some things around that. The third section is really all about ways to eradicate downtime in your IT environment. And then at the end, we're just going to share some information about the Infoscale solutions and how they can be used to eradicate downtime and defend yourself against ransomware. So with that, why don't we dive in here?
Yeah, do. And Chris, what I would offer is that this is, folks, it's got a lot of academic content. So we worked hard on this. Chris, before we get going, Jerry Cohn saying looking forward to the presentation. Roy is saying prizes available in Canada. That's actually a fair question.
That is correct.
Okay. And then David Lichted saying where are the slides, handouts, and we will get you the slide deck. Chris, if you have a PDF or some version of the truth that you can get over to me, I'll get that out on the thank you note tomorrow. The webinar.
Absolutely.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
In fact, I think we covered that on the intro slide. There you go. So there is a recording, and it'll be posted later. The slides are available in the handout section, and if you can't find them there, we'll be happy to send a copy to you. And again, please send in your questions. All right. So let's start with DR. I think this is almost a truism. Can never be overstated. Most businesses, especially in SMB, really aren't well equipped to handle or respond to IT outages, which is it's a great thing for IT service providers. We've got a couple of really interesting stats that have come out of some recent studies. The thing about this that's most interesting to me is not just the sheer size of the dollar amount of downtime impact on business, but is interesting is you think more about revenue loss or the cost to replace broken hardware or whatnot, but the biggest impact is actually on worker productivity. And so, business grinds to a halt, and it's a lot worse than just the time it takes to fix the problem. It disrupts the flow of the business, and this is an impact of IT downtime on a business productivity. It's a huge hit to the workers as the end story here. Another one is kind of interesting is how frequently it happens or how many businesses get impacted. And again, a couple more interesting studies. But over 90% of the businesses surveyed have had at least one data center outage in the last 24 months. 47% experienced outage or significant downtime this year. And as you look at the causes of these things, we frequently talk about things like hurricanes and floods and whatnot as the worst case scenario. But the acts of God only seem to show up about 5% of the time. And you can see that much more common, in addition to the hardware drives and whatnot. Human error right up there at number 2, surprising nobody, I'm sure. So this is an interesting graph, and it's going to build over a few different pieces. And what it really contrasts is there's a range of expense levels for different solutions that you can have, and there's the recovery times that you get from those solutions. And typically, the shorter your recovery time, the more money you have to spend to make that happen. It's kind of the general story here. So if you take a look back to the old Veritas or Symantec backup exec days and tape, where pretty much everybody started, it was pretty cheap, but it took a long time to actually get a system back up and running by, replace the hardware and then copy from tape to restore everything. So cheap but slow. Cloud really started to come into play more in the 2009, 2010 time frame for SMB. Zenith Infotech was one of the first players to provide a combination of kind of appliance and cloud solution going way back. I'm probably dating myself by throwing that name out. But again, so the expense has gone up slightly, but recovery time was a lot better because it was faster than tape. Appliances, again, go right back to Zenith. As one of the first to market with something like this. There's now a number of different players in this space that you're probably all familiar with. But this allows you to put a dedicated piece of hardware into the local network, back things up on a much more regular basis. The cost, of course, continue to rise because now you've got a piece of dedicated hardware, but recovery time significantly better going this route. So as we continue to climb this ladder, time to recovery getting shorter, cost to make it happen is going up. Cold site disaster recovery, this is where you've now got a complete second set of hardware at another location, and this is probably one of the most expensive approaches to this. And only really large enterprises could ever afford to do this, and even they're moving away from it, but this was the most, if you had the dough, this was the way to do the best recovery because you could literally flip a switch and light up a whole second data center.
Yeah, and I remember that was sort of a compliance play. I was in a former life an IT consultant for the credit unions, financial institutions, and I remember some of that. But I always saw that as also, again, coming at a little bit more from a compliance point of view.
Yeah.
But please continue.
No, it's interesting. And then the step beyond that with the warm site DR, now you've got to layer in a whole suite of software that was, replicating transactions on a real-time basis, or as real-time as they could make it. And that really does talk to your financial, your stockbrokers, and those guys have to have that down to the last transaction sort of replication going on both sides. Really, really expensive, right? And so very few companies, really none in the SMB world, could afford to even think about that approach to that sort of thing, right? So we see this kind of escalating ladder of expense and the shorter and shorter recovery time, and really what we're shooting for in the last one, hot site DR, where you've actually got the two running side by side continuously, where one goes down, the other one picks it up, and no one in the network even knows something has happened. In the perfect world, you're trying to find the balancing act between what you can afford to spend to do this stuff and still get the shortest time to recover. And so we refer to that as the disaster recovery nirvana, where you're spending very little, maybe down around the price of tape, but you've got the somewhere between warm and hot site speed to recovery. And this is the place that everybody would like to be, and even SMB-sized companies can afford to participate. And so we look at these trade-offs and try to figure out how can we apply some of these new technologies to deliver this kind of recovery time at that low cost. So this is kind of a busy slide. I'm not going to read it all to you, but really the top portion talks about the experience of a customer in traditional backup, where something crashes, they've got to repair the hardware, then they've got to download the copies, and then they've got to reconfigure. And it can be anywhere from hours to days to get a site back up and running after that disaster. The concept of disaster recovery as a service really is designed to provide, again, that DRaaS nirvana, or the really quick recovery in terms of failover. And this can be done in terms of failover to a local appliance.
Yep, Chris, are you there? Yeah, I think we've lost the audio. Lawrence Steinhardt, I appreciate the confirmation. Um, Jurgen, yes, we're looking for Chris. Corey, I'm going to read your question. Chris, if you can double check your microphone, sir, or call back in on your mobile phone, as it were. Corey asked, what do you see as the main adoption for SMBs for DR, for disaster recovery? So we'll get Chris right back. Jenny, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Hey, man, you got to switch your cell phone carrier. Can you hear me now?
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So where did it cut out? I have no idea where you lost me.
About 3 minutes ago, so you weren't really quite yet into the slide. But Chris, since we're kind of regrouping, I have a question from Corey Kirkendall. Let's take that one, and we'll level set. So the question is, what do you see as the main adoption for SMBs for DR, for disaster recovery? What are the triggers?
What are the main reasons they do it, or what are the main solutions that they're using today? Which way do you think we should answer that?
Yeah, the main reasons. Corey, main solutions. Corey, just
main solutions. Okay, so it's interesting, and we're gonna touch on this a little bit more as we move forward. But there's lots of different approaches and technologies available to address different portions of your network, whether it's an individual laptop or a whole server infrastructure and those kinds of things. But I would say that the most common thing that we're seeing across all of SMB is this appliance model, where you've got the dedicated piece of equipment that's on site that runs the local backup. Not everyone is doing things like virtualized failover, but the backup appliance, or BDR appliance, is, I think, the most common in SMB today. Okay,
very cool. So let's rock. Let's rock on this
Okay.
slide. We got you back.
All right, so this slide, you guys have all been looking at it for 5 minutes waiting for me to explain what you're seeing, I think. Basically, all this does is compare and contrast kind of traditional backup and recovery, which can take hours to days to go through that whole process, versus the idea of disaster recovery on demand, or the ability to fail over either to a local appliance like we just discussed, or fail over to the cloud with some more advanced solutions. So continue along here. So here's your end user working along merrily. Suddenly disaster strikes, some sort of an outage, and that guy is no longer able to work. Now in this case, again, you can do that local recover and virtualize to the appliance right there in the local area network, repair the problem, and then actually, they keep working obviously, and then fail back to the server. So it's minimize that disruption to the users without having to have huge delays and that giant productivity hit. And so that's really the driving concept behind disaster recovery as a service. All right. So that's kind of covered some of the evolution of DR. I wanted to really dive into now the hot topic du jour that seems to be in the news literally almost every day. I seem to see things where someone is paying bitcoins to get their data back, and they're not cheap. And what Bitcoin's going for these days, Harry? You have any idea?
No, I've lost track. I watched a great documentary on that whole world about a year ago. I do not know, sir.
I know. I've heard figures all over the board, but anywhere from several to tens of thousands of dollars for one Bitcoin. It's pretty crazy. All right, and that's how they like to get the ransom paid, as we're going to cover. Before we dive into the content, we'd love to do a poll. Have you, the listener, ever been a victim of ransomware, or if you're a partner of any of your customers, ever been a victim of ransomware? I'd love to hear from you on this. I'll give you a second to chime in.
Okay, folks, while you're doing that, again, if you came in a little bit late, we are with Chris from Infrascale today. Really the only housekeeping item I have today for SMB Nation is the tour to cloud, just as it sounds, tourtocloud.com, Azure 365, and so on. Okay, please answer the poll question because we're ready to read off the results. Chris, whatever your pleasure, whenever you're ready to.
Oh, go for it. Why don't you let us know what came back?
I am not seeing that screen. Jenny, do you hang on? Polls. Let me do a little trick here.
I'm looking for polls.
I got it.
I got it. No, I got it.
Okay.
52% yes. No, it's over in the control panel. We're talking about that, Chris. The UI. We had a UI conversation earlier.
Clunky.
Yeah, 52% yes and 48% no. So there you go. Just over half is yes.
Interesting. So I saw another one that was a poll more focused on service providers. So they obviously are exposed to a lot more customers than an individual company, but 91% of the MSPs that were surveyed had at least one customer affected by ransomware in the last 12 months, and 40% of those were affected 2 or more times. So this is pretty common, and like I said, it's definitely top of mind and out there in the news every day. I just read the other day a clinic in Minnesota had to pay $17,000 to get their data back.
Yep.
They probably weren't HIPAA compliant if they bumped into that, were they?
Yeah. Good Lord. All righty, let's move on.
All right, so ransomware is kind of interesting. I mean, the concept has been around for quite a while. It has evolved, and it's definitely getting more and more sophisticated over time. It's the eternal race between the hackers and the defenders, black hat, white hat kind of thing. Again, I'm not going to read everything on here, but I think the couple of points to take away from this. In the beginning, ransomware would get on a system and take a long time to gradually, encrypt files and lock up a system. High-speed encryption has made it a whole lot easier for these malware things to get in and lock up a PC a whole lot faster. And then most recently, we've all heard about CryptoLocker. That's been in the news quite a bit. And along with that, we're starting to see this idea of Bitcoin as a way for them to safely take ransom money in an untraceable fashion. So
Yep.
it's kind of interesting that the Bitcoin currency is actually enabling ransomware to some extent to be a viable
and
option for these
Chris,
guys.
We have Jurgen and Roy have come back with Bitcoin quotes. Jurgen says 400 to 600. Roy said initially 300, but then he corrected himself with the current exchange rate, $807 Canadian. $807 Canadian. So
wow.
now we're up to the minute. The markets are still open for about another 47 minutes.
and apparently it moves every day. Well, thanks for the quotes. And so 800 Canadian, probably what's that put, about 680 US, right? So pretty crazy. All right. So let's keep rolling. Thank you for those. Ransomware on the rise, yeah, obviously. So we talked about that. The thing that's interesting, again, we talked about it, is kind of the rate of change or the speed at which the hackers are able to have these things change and morph and tweak to basically be able to work their way around antivirus being the traditional defense for this stuff, or anti-malware. And so some other stats that came out of that were kind of interesting, that most of these ransomware victims are unable to access their data for at least 2 days. $209 million have been paid in ransom for ransomware in the first quarter of this calendar year. And again, we talk about, so 34%, 1/3 of SMBs have fallen prey to phishing emails in 2015. So when your uncle from Nigeria is trying to lure you in with that email, you may want to think twice about clicking on that link, just saying. Okay, so limited options. Get the data back, you could pay the money. And again, we're talking about $807 Canadian or $680 US per Bitcoin. They don't usually ask for just one either, just saying. So you can pay the money, and sometimes that's the only way to go if you've not properly prepared or defended yourself. The ability to restore the systems is the way we'd like to go, obviously. That assumes that you've got a copy of the data somewhere, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. The two sides to that, or I said the two sides, but the 3 steps to that. One, you want to get the infected machine off of your local area network once you realize that you've got an infection. Usually there's some period of time that has gone on between the actual infection before someone actually notices. And so reducing that amount of time would be a good thing. But once you do know that there is a infected machine in the network, then you have to figure out when you were infected, scrub that machine, and then load a clean backup from prior to the infection. So each one of these pieces is kind of interesting to us. So one of the first questions is, but I've already got, I'm not going to name any name brands, but I've already got antivirus, anti-malware software on my computer, so that I should be protected, right? I'll be good. What's interesting, again, is that these guys are getting really, really sophisticated in the way that they tweak and change and morph their styles of infection to get around these. So these signatures are, how often do you update the signatures on your antivirus or anti-malware? Maybe once a day.
Yep.
The studies are, maybe once a day if you've got that automated. Most people probably less than that, right? And some studies have come up with figures that say that there are new threats that are hitting the internet at the rate of once every 3.5 seconds. So unless you're in the business of updating your signatures, that pace, you're probably not going to be covered all the time. And again, the classic one, the 4th bullet is my favorite one, is that users have always been known to have bad digital hygiene. And this is not just on the antivirus, anti-malware, but backup, honestly. As I'm sure you guys have seen in SMB, their backup approach ranges everywhere from the most sophisticated to never done it. And frequently, someone's laptop is getting stolen out of the back of their car, and the last time that was backed up was a month ago. And guess what?
Yeah.
They just lost a month's worth of data, right?
Yeah. Hey, a couple of observations. We have Corey asking, and it probably relates to the prior slide. The main question I always hear is whether you do or do not pay the ransom. What do you suggest? I think your last slide actually covered that with the decision tree pay the
Yeah.
ransom or restore the system.
Yeah.
Roy asks, or comments, Roy says, if you want to go one slide forward to what I'll call the current slide, the customer contacted me over ransomware that was infected via a zip file that came in via email as a job application. They had recently posted job openings, and the file was titled personalresume.zip. So to your point earlier about maybe the AV system not picking up on it, that could be a perfect example that you think you're getting a job application.
Right. So those hackers saw that they posted a job and had already created this phishing scheme to go directly after that, right? So beware if you're putting stuff out there on Monster or whatnot, you may be getting those emails shortly. The other one along those lines that we've been seeing a lot of lately, and because it's kind of a ubiquitous service that everyone's into, is Amazon Prime. Everybody loves it, right? Free shipping, 2 days.
Yep.
Amazon updates of various guises, various account updates, shipping updates, all Amazon branded very, very cleverly is another really common and productive for them phishing scheme that's been going on out there. But yeah, to your point, opening an attachment, that's going to go right around your antivirus stuff there.
Yep. There you go.
I think the last bullet here, which actually makes a great point, is you do need to have antivirus, anti-malware, and you should have it set up so that it's updating regularly, but it needs to be part of a layered approach. It by itself is not going to give you the amount of protection that you need here. In fact, you need the 1-2 punch. I like this one, the boxer in a suit. So yeah, antivirus, anti-malware. There's a number of companies that provide good quality products there, but they are not going to catch some of the most up-to-the-minute signatures or crafty ways to infect the network. And the real answer to avoid paying that ransom, if you're going to have this happen to you, is to have good quality backup and disaster recovery. And what that means is frequent backup and the ability to bring back an entire system and do it quickly. If you've got both of those pieces in place, then you're only going to lose data back to the point of the infection, which could still suck, but if you can minimize that time window, then you won't lose nearly as much as, say, everything, right? So the whole concept here is the ability to really turn back time on a system, and if you've been doing regular backups, you can then go back through all of those backups you've done and determine when was I infected, and then load the last clean backup that you have to your machine. And so if you've got a quality backup system, especially if it's got the archiving to the cloud kind of feature, you can go back as far as you need to. And again, we'll talk a little bit about how you determine when you were first infected and those sorts of things. But basically what you're trying to do is just turn back time on your system to a point before it was infected and then start going from there. But you will have lost your data from the point of the infection until you go through the restore. I just wanted to go really briefly through a couple of universities. We've got a number of universities that use our solution in the way we've been describing it with the backup and DR, specifically to combat ransomware. University of Calgary recently had an episode of malware, and unfortunately they did not have good quality backups, and for that particular machine they had to pay $17,000 Canadian to get their data back. So I'm not sure exactly how many bitcoins that is. It looks like about 22 at the current rate, but not cool to come up with 17,000 Canadian to get your data back. At the same time, we had one of our customers at the University of Virginia Alumni Association who got hit with multiple machines on their network. They detected it very rapidly and were able to get those infected folks back up and running on clean versions of their data in less than 2 hours. And so this, I think, is the place that most people would like to be, as opposed to trying to figure out how they're going to pay for 22 bitcoins. Okay, so now we've talked about kind of the evolution of disaster recovery. We've talked about some of the impact that we've seen recently from ransomware. Really wanted now to cover kind of multiple approaches, and we talked about that layered approach to how to achieve zero downtime and zero data loss and from different kinds of disasters. So 5 different things that you can look at. The first one is protecting your budget, which is really about how do you spend less to achieve the kind of disaster recovery that we were looking at. The second one is how do you protect all systems? Many networks, only the servers are protected or only some of the devices are protected. And one of the big kind of waves that we've seen in SMB, there's people running around with all kinds of different devices. So the BYO device is another exposure that a lot of customers and customers of our partners are always looking to defend against, like people bringing their own iPads and smartphones into the network, right? How do you protect against both big and small disasters, so not just the hurricanes, but the local power failure or an internet outage, right? How do you protect against human error, which, as we saw from one of the earlier slides, roughly 1/4 of the outages that the SMBs experienced last year were caused by human error. And then number 5 really comes back to the stuff that we just spent a fair amount of time on, which is the ransomware play. So a little bit more detail on each of these 5 areas. And Harry, feel free to chime in if you've got a story or a comment on any of these.
All righty.
All right, so number 1 really comes back to that whole cold site, warm site, hot site, a whole secondary, location with replicated hardware. It's pretty much the most expensive way you can go. Especially if you're trying to do the hot site where you're replicating individual transactions, really complicated to not only deploy but to test and then use properly in case of an actual disaster. There are trade-offs in terms of your time to recovery and vulnerable to hackers because you're sending a lot of data back and forth out over the internet between the 2 sites, so it's hard to really harden or secure those environments, and you're paying vast sums to make that happen. So we don't recommend this way to do it. It can cost you quite a bit. It's going to be at least double just on hardware alone to replicate those sites, right? Again, this is probably the single most common area where SMBs fail to protect all aspects of their environment. We talked a little bit before about the prevalence of the BDR appliances in SMB. They're frequently just backing up Windows servers. Some folks have gone a step farther and done things with, like Veeam products to back up VMware, for example, and things like that. But in many cases, they're not backing up people's workstations. They're typically not backing up people that have laptops that are in and out of the office, and in almost no case are they backing up mobile devices like the iPads and phones and that sort of thing. And so one of the key areas to focus on is how do you protect all systems? One of the big challenges to do that potentially is it take a lot of different backup products to actually back up everything in an environment. And as we know, it's one of the goals of IT departments and service providers both is to back up more stuff using less products. So if you can find solutions that address multiple portions of this wheel, then you have a whole lot simpler environment and you have less exposure. But this is one of the most common places that SMBs fall down in their backup environment. Micro versus macro, again, I think the mega disasters are the ones that get in the news most often, but they're not that common. We say 5% of disasters are caused by acts of God, but on the other hand, there's a whole lot of micro stuff caused by people.
Yep. Let me just take a gander at this. So we have the primary and the secondary. Boy, this is bringing back MCSE exam trauma. But with the paired applications, okay, with AWS and Azure. No, this is a good slide because you're certainly seeing that conversation. I mentioned at the beginning, I believe I was in a breakfast meeting with the Azure team, and they were sharing that the highest use of Azure is virtual machines. And a couple of us at the table responded, well, wouldn't it be DR, right? Wouldn't that be what the SMBs are looking for Azure to do for them would be disaster recovery? And they said, no, it's actually spinning off virtual machines, and they tend to grow like wildfire once people get used to them. Now, Chris, a DR scenario could be a VM, was one way to look at it. But I don't know. I thought I'd add that value. Just had this conversation this morning.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of customers are now starting to send data to Azure, also to Google Cloud and Amazon's various offerings, and then in addition to just storing data there, now you can rent resources, CPUs and RAM, and run virtual networks up there as well. And so we're seeing more and more of that as well. Can be rather expensive depending on what it is you're trying to do. In some cases, they make it easy to get your stuff up there, and a lot more expensive to get your data back. Not to name any brands, but I hear stories about that all the time.
Yep. Yep.
But again, I think the big thing here is most of the problems people bump into are not going to be the big lose your whole building sort of things. It's going to be some minor error that a person does in many cases, or loss of power, loss of internet connectivity, most common.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I liked that slide earlier. I meant to comment that, earthquakes, I mean, really, Seattle hasn't had a earthquake where people had to go home in the middle of the day since 2001. I mean, the media, it tends to, it magnifies natural disasters, but in reality, it's a very, very small percentage of your time. So, in any event, please continue, Chris.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we're here in California, so we think about the earthquakes probably a little more often than you do in Seattle.
Yeah.
There you go. So number 4, protect against human error. Easy for me to say. Really, the point this one is making is not so much the stuff we just touched on, which is that they cause a lot of the downtime. When it's time to actually do a recovery and you're bringing multiple servers up in one environment, that's another place that you can make mistakes and slow down the recovery time. And so the concept of orchestration, where you want to bring up individual servers and applications in a specific order to make it all work properly, is a key component to any disaster recovery plan. And this is one more place where you can, you might have done a good job of the backup, but unless you've got that playbook or runbook set up properly, you're going to screw up the recovery motion. So this is another portion of a plan that you have to make sure that you are that you've got in place prior to the disaster if you're going to minimize your downtime. And then in the last one, we talked about ransomware. One of the big things about ransomware, and we've touched on it before, is you need to roll back to before you were infected, scrub the machine, and then put that last clean backup. So obviously you need to be backing up on a regular basis. But there's kind of 2 pieces to that are inherent. Is how do you know when you were infected? And what can you do to detect that you are infected as quickly as possible so that those time windows are as small as possible? Because again, from the time of infection to detection to scrubbing the machine and loading a complete BMR image of that machine, how long does that take? A lot of the time might be consumed in just figuring out that you're actually infected. Some of the more recent clever ransomware infections are designed to just kind of cruise in the background and not let you know that you're infected. You don't realize that you're having this problem until you finally hit one of the locked files. And that could be literally anywhere from minutes to hours to days before your user on the network that decided to open that job application realizes that they're infected. And so one of the things that we're going to take a look at the end in areas that InfoScale can help you is the idea of anomaly detection to give you some early warning signs that one or more machines on the network may be infected. And so protecting specifically against ransomware is that 5th area that you need to focus on if you're going to eliminate downtime in an SMB.
Yep. Jurgen adds to your observation about the problem with infections, he says, is when those have a time delay until they fully strike. So there's affirmation. Hey, we have a poll. We have about 20 minutes left, so we got to keep moving, folks. I do see some more questions. We have a poll. So if you could answer the poll, folks, there we go. Organizers and panelists don't vote. What, they took my voting rights away? What's going on?
Harry, you don't get an opinion.
Yeah, exactly. They took away my early polling, my voting rights. Man. While we're doing that, Roy goes on to say, this is more of a comment, the exemption of workstations from backup solutions isn't a technology problem, it's a value problem. Most SMBs don't consider workstations to be worth backing up as soon as there's a cost on the table for that. So
I'd agree. That's a prevalent attitude. You hear about it all the time, right?
And Grace says, yes, they took my voting rights away. Okay, Grace. Not going to go there with Grace. She's still a little sore about the primary season, so God bless you, Grace. All right, hey, whenever you're ready, we'll do a wrap on the poll. Let me get that screen up.
Yeah, let's see what we got.
Okay, so we have, there we go, we have 48% happy. Chris, go ahead. Can you see that on the screen? I can read it, or can you see it, sir?
No, I can't see it, so why don't you go ahead.
Yeah, 8% not happy, 44% happy with backup solution, and 48% happy with our BDR solution. I'm just here to learn. So there we go.
Cool.
All right,
and we roll on. So let's just touch on briefly how we can help address some of these issues. And if you're interested, we'd certainly love to have you come take a look at the solution.
Yep.
So we touched a little bit on, again, how there's different kind of pieces to the IT infrastructure. And one of the big challenges, again, is that in many cases in SMB, your mission critical servers, if you've got a core data center, that's the stuff that's typically getting backed up. But if you've got remote workers, or you've got, and it's frequently owners or executives that are out running around with laptops, and those are the ones that not only are they the most likely to get infected with ransomware, but also the least likely to get backed up, which is kind of the perfect storm that we've been talking about most of the hour here. We've actually got a suite of products that addresses both areas and rolls all this stuff up into one dashboard. We've got both the disaster recovery, which is the complete image backup locally to the appliance and to the cloud that can be virtualized to light up those systems. And then we have a direct-to-cloud backup offering, which is focused on laptops and all those sorts of things, which would be how you're going to recover from your ransomware. So we've got the whole spectrum covered. I think I just talked about that a little bit. So in addition to the servers, both physical and virtual servers, so if you're on a VMware, Hyper-V, or again, the most exposed areas, it's going to be those laptops and mobile devices, which I think is, again, a real concern now, because almost everybody's got a smartphone, and there's a lot of folks coming in and off the network with iPads and Android tablets, and those are almost never protected. Lots of different operating systems in these environments, even in SMB, and obviously the bigger the enterprise you get into, the more of these you'll bump into. But even in SMB, it used to be pretty much all Windows all the time. You're not seeing that anymore, and you're starting to see lots and lots of different operating systems, both for physical as well as virtual environments. And then you've got things like Android and iOS for those phones and sorts of things. So the other area that you can focus on is where do you send this data? We've been talking about sending data to the cloud for the last hour. In many cases, you can send it to whatever vendor is supplying your backup and disaster recovery appliance, or some companies could be sending that data to a private cloud. And this could be the private cloud that's been stood up by a managed service provider for all their customers, or a third party or public cloud, and this would be your Amazons and your Azures and those kinds of things. We're neutral. All three options are available, whatever preference you have. If you do choose to use our appliance backing up data to our cloud, we have a lot more control over the amount of resource that's dedicated to a virtualized spin-up, less so in a private cloud or in Amazon or Azure, but we have customers that do all three of these things, and that's an option. So it's very flexible, and you can decide which flavor you want to take advantage of. Again, we talked about lots of different kinds of devices, lots of different operating systems, and lots of different flavors of cloud, and we can accommodate just about every one of those combinations, no matter what environment your SMB IT looks like. We've got lots of data centers scattered around the earth here. We've got several in the U.S., a couple in Canada, You can see we've got them also in South Africa, Australia, and the UK. So if you happen to have a company that's multinational and they've got restrictions about whether they send their data across the border, which seems to be always an exciting topic for our US and Canadian customers and partners about making sure their data stays on their side of that border, we've got you covered there. And this just gives you a sense really of how big the customer base and how many devices, customers, and partners are being protected by the InfraScale service today. This is actually one of my favorite slides. This has been one of the hottest areas within the industry. HIPAA obviously has been around for quite a while, and customers and partners are getting more and more sophisticated in terms of how they deal with that. However, we're also starting to see that the government is now starting to aggressively go after organizations and levying some pretty significant fines around HIPAA. So if they're not completely covered, this is something that they need to be focused on. We have a ton of healthcare customers and a number of partners that are focused exclusively on that vertical and use InfraScale as a part of a HIPAA compliant solution. Our data centers are SSA 16 certified. And then we meet a number of other things around things like FINRA and SOX, and then another area that's actually becoming more and more heated up right now is the CGIS, or the CJIS compliance, which is really to do with law enforcement and police departments who really don't have many options in terms of where they can offsite their data to. This is an area that many of our partners have come to us and said that really not been able to find other options specifically. And because of the compliance rules, those entities can only offsite their data to a CGIS compliant data center. And so we're proud to add that offering to our suite. The compliance and certifications is a real strength of our company, and we're happy to talk to you about any of these. In fact, just to throw one more out there, most recently a partner of mine in Vegas had us go through the process, and we are also compliant with the Nevada state gaming board's rules and regulations. Probably not applicable to everybody, but I thought that was kind of interesting. So we've touched on quite a bit of this, but there's kind of three phases to the backup and offsiting of data. We encrypt that data in flight from the appliance all the way to the data center. It is encrypted at rest within our data center. We also offer one more option. For the truly paranoid, you can have a unique key that only the user has and encrypt it locally and all the way through the chain so that no one in InfraScale actually has the ability to access that data. I do throw out one word of caution. If you choose to go this route and you lose that key, you've got a serious problem because nobody can get into that data. But it's there, and we've had a few ultra-secure government entities that required this, so we built it, and it is available to all of our customers. So if you want to create your own unique key and make sure that nobody but you has access to that data, that can be done as well. This is kind of interesting, and it got its own slide because it's a fairly unique guarantee in the industry. If you do offsite your data to our cloud, we guarantee that you can light up any server in 15 minutes or less, virtualized. I remember in the early days of doing failover to the cloud, it could take as many as hours to light up a single big fat Exchange server, that sort of thing, and how you provision those with the right amount of RAM and CPU, etc. But this is one of the guarantees that we offer as part of our SLA that in any disaster, we guarantee that we will light up any server in 15 minutes or less. And I recommend you come check it out and take us up on it if you don't believe me. The three main use cases, and I think we've touched on all these already, but push-button failover with orchestration. So you've lost the building, you want to light up all these servers in sequence, or you've just lost one server. You've got these runbooks in place. You can light them up and get back on and running as quickly as possible. We've talked about cloud backup and recovery. The last use case we haven't really spent any time on, but the concept of data archiving. An appliance on site has got a limited capacity, but the cloud has near infinite capacity. We definitely can scale it out. We have petabytes in storage. You could keep maybe just the last 30 days locally and then keep an archive of multiple years in the cloud and never overfill your appliance. So data archiving is another use case that has been fairly popular. I've got a handful of questions here because I suspect that some of these are going to be coming in shortly that we'll run through, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So if you've got questions about any of this, please go ahead and put them in now. We're going to be drawing a winner, as we mentioned earlier, and giving out an Xbox, an Apple TV, or a Pardot drone to the winner. Okay, so what source environments for the InfraScale service? We touched on this. Just about any OS, whether hardware-oriented or virtual. How secure is it? We talked about end-to-end encryption. And again, not only that, but if you want to do that user key, you can lock it up locally and make sure that no one at our company can see the data either. The SLA we touched on as well, a 15-minute failover guarantee. Most servers in our experience, we light them up in 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, not even close to 15, but 15 gives us that little bit of buffer. Scope of the failover and orchestration, we touched on that a little bit. You can fail over a single server, locally or in the cloud, or you can light up a whole series of them using the runbook and orchestrate the order in which they come back up. What do you need to buy? We didn't touch on any pricing or packaging here, but the way that the solution works is we base the pricing on the amount of data that you're trying to protect. We go through the sizing exercise with you and supply the right amount of hardware for that included in the subscription. If you ever outgrow that appliance, we will migrate the data and move you into the next bigger appliance. And that doesn't change the price. The pricing is exclusively based on how much data you're trying to protect. And then we talked about how much it costs. Again, this depends on whether you're doing just backup or disaster recovery, but it is a subscription model with a monthly fee. And it costs less than a fifth the price of SunGuard, which is the hot site solution we were looking at earlier. If you're interested in learning more about this, obviously, please feel free to contact us and be happy to show you the offering and walk you through pricing. So with that, we've got one last poll, and then we're going to turn it over to Q&A.
All righty.
So if you've go ahead and chime in on this one.
Yep, folks, if you could answer the poll question. Again, stick with us. We have a bunch of questions queued up over here that I want to get through. And we've got about just over 6 minutes left until 1 p.m. Pacific. So if you could answer the question, let's see. I'm watching the rate over here on the poll meter. We have 75% voted, 78, 80. There we go, folks. Keep it going. All right, I think we're getting a trend. 81% have voted. So go ahead and close it, Chris, and I'll read the results.
All right.
We have, with 81% of the attendees voting, we have 54% replied yes, and 46% replied no.
All right, that's awesome. Well, those of you in the 54%, please reach out. We'll give you some contact info in a moment. So again, next steps with us, and this is before we'll go to Q&A, so get your questions in. Ransomware is one of the top security threats. We just spent a lot of time talking about it, and you hear about it daily. If you'd like to learn more about anomaly detection and how to do that kind of backup and recovery stuff and fail over to the cloud, we would be happy to show that to you. So go ahead and email us to team@infrascale.com, and someone will get back to you right away.
All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll by. I've got a handful of questions here. We'll start with the last one, but it's pretty easy. Have you guys done any work with any of the casinos? Have you put your solution inside casinos that you're aware of?
At this point, we have not. However, our partner in Vegas is planning to take us into a couple that are his customers. But that very first hurdle that we had to cross was, did we meet the requirements of the Nevada State Gaming Board, which we did successfully do. So I think I'll be able to tell you yes in about 90 days.
Okay, we have Corey asking, how do you handle testing of the backups or help test them? So how do you test backups? What's the story on that?
Well, there's really two kind of flavors of that, right? One is basically to go ahead and just restore individual files, or try to restore one complete image of a server. Probably the more complex one is the ability to test a failover, especially failover to the cloud. In many solutions, it costs money, or there's a limitation on how often You can do testing to fail over to the cloud, and you can run it in such a fashion where it's almost in a sandbox where you fail over to the cloud, check it out, make sure it works without affecting daily productivity. But again, most solutions either charge on a per instance basis or have a limitation on how often you can do that. Our subscription is completely unlimited. You can do as many tests as you want, and in the case of an actual disaster, you can leave it up and running for as long as you want without having to pay any additional fees before you finally bring it back, fail back over to the hard site.
All right, Stephen Banks asked, and I think I understand, Stephen, it's under the 15-minute failover guarantee, is there a guarantee? Is there one in relation to the data uploaded? He goes on to say, how old will it be the recovered VM? So I think it has to do with your guarantee.
Sure. So most people will fail over to the most recent backup, whatever that is. So if they've set their backups to 15-minute or 1 hour, whatever that is, they'll typically light that one up, and we'll light up whatever copy you select in 15 minutes or less. But if you've got, for example, we talked about things like malware and spy and ransomware that have gotten onto a network, you may have to rewind to an older version of your image, but you can still light that up in the 15-minute or less guarantee.
Lauren Steinhardt asked, do we resell directly or go through distribution for your product, your solution?
That's an excellent question, and actually it's an area I was hoping to mention and forgot about earlier, which is we've got a great partner program. We sell our solution, the disaster recovery as a solution, as a service, and the cloud backup exclusively through our network of partners, which are primarily MSPs and IT service providers and some value-added resellers. We don't currently offer it through distribution. The partner relationship is directly with InfraScale, and then they can then service their customers.
Excuse me, Tom Harper's asking entry level cost of an appliance, for example, 3 servers at 500 gig a piece. Entry level cost.
So that's a great question. So we don't actually sell appliances. The hardware is supplied, again, based on the amount of data that you're trying to back up and fail over. We've got a flat price per terabyte per month, and then again we will have one of our SEs go through the sizing exercise with you and supply the right amount of hardware for the offering or for that particular deployment. And this is a particular area of pain, I know, for many partners because it's a real balancing act between putting the least cost sized appliance into a customer environment to lower that upfront CapEx, but have enough headroom to grow it over time. And I know that is a challenge, and I've had a lot of partners that have had, rough times with customers where they've sold them a solution, and then 6 months later they've got to put them in the next bigger box. We remove all of that risk from both the customer and the partner by basically including the hardware in the subscription. So that's really one of the more interesting aspects of the way the product is delivered to the customers, and it removes a lot of the risk around the appliance sizing and the need to purchase hardware up front from both the customers and our partners.
Okay, and let me bring back the next, there we go. The next question is, Jurgen, nowadays companies have an excess of hundreds of terabytes. How would a disaster recovery as a service handle the huge data amount over a slow network connection? So slow network connection.
That sounds like a failover to the cloud type question. So the way that would be handled today is the load would be spread over multiple appliances locally, typically, so you have enough local resource to fail over that many servers on site. In terms of in the cloud, the failover would run just fine in the cloud, but your connection speed is actually going to probably dictate the user experience. And so as part of that disaster recovery scenario, you're going to make sure that your users have an ability to get to that stuff in the cloud. So and frequently that's, go work from home because the building's down or whatever, but those are things you want to think of in advance, build into that disaster playbook, and make sure that every user knows what they do in the event of a disaster and has the ability to get to those servers in the cloud to get decent performance. I hope that answers the question.
All righty. Larry Owens asked, do they, being you, do they offer any assistance or a buyout of competitors' contracts, migrations, etc.? So any assistance for the MSP who signs up with you?
That's a great question, and we actually do that. We have a term for that. We call it a fleet replacement, and frequently what we found is that partners that are working with multiple vendors and not completely happy with the fact that they need 2 to 3 or 4 vendors to cover their customers have deployed a few of ours, decided they want to put everybody onto the same platform so they can see them in the dashboard, and we actually do, on a custom basis, go through an exercise and size all those with the partner and then do a fleet replacement of everything. And so in many cases, that is a timed discount of the cost of our solution until the other term contracts run out. And so they're not double paying, which is really kind of the net of it. So yes, we do these frequently. It seems to be a pretty common behavior after partners have rolled out a few that they want to get all of their customers onto one platform. And we're happy to take a look at exactly what you're doing. Again, I won't name names, but there's a number of different point solutions that we've been replacing a fair amount of lately.
Okay, well, we're at time. You know, here's what I'm thinking we'll do is there are a few more questions. Let's announce our winner for the individual that gets to pick from the 3 prizes for asking questions. Dean Nichols on your team is told me that Tracy Cox is our prize winner.
Tracy Cox.
Yeah, and you know what? I need to get to her questions, but Tracy's the winner, so we'll read her too. And then what I'm going to offer is that Chris, you and Dean will be getting a copy of this, the transcript for the questions, and maybe you could reply by email to Roy has a few more questions.
Yeah.
Stephen had a few more questions, but we'll probably want to respect everybody's time. So Tracy asked, we will ask these. If I have 8 locations, but only 1.5 terabytes of data, does this mean you only charge me for 2 terabytes till I have a need for more? If so, I would assume each location receives an appliance.
So we didn't really dig into the methodology, but you can actually do this with a physical or a virtual appliance. And so what we have seen is a lot of customers go through an approach where they put the physical servers in the biggest sites, and then they just throw a virtual appliance onto a VMware server in the remote offices, or they might do direct to cloud from those offices as well. But if it makes sense, and that's the type of backup and DR scenario that you want to do, you could potentially put a appliance on every location, and we've got instances of that as well. Those are the kinds of things that our SEs will do in discovery with the partner or customer ahead of time to figure out what they're trying to achieve, and then we'll supply the appropriate amount of hardware to make that work properly.
Okay, final question from Tracy. I also have a question regarding another client. They have national and international locations. How would this work for the HQ in Chicago?
So we've got, as you saw earlier, we've got data centers scattered around the world. The Chicago location would be backed up probably to Salt Lake City or LA or one of our Texas locations, whichever one had the best speed. International locations, because of the whole restriction on sending data out of international lines, it's going to depend a little bit on what country they're in. We can route them to any of our international data centers as makes sense. And if it's a specific instance in a country where we don't have a data center, depending on the size of the opportunity, we could potentially light up another one. We've added 2 just in the last year for that reason, primarily outside the U.S. So we've got a lot of multinational companies that are headquartered here that do this scenario, and we've got a number of different approaches to that, but it's not been a problem.
Cool. All right. Well, there are a few more questions, so we'll look to you to Tracy. There's another one from Tracy. Okay, folks, we better all get back to work. So, Chris, I'll look to you if you don't mind to answer these individually from the transcripts. But congratulations to Tracy on winning one of the toys, one of the prizes. And we'll see you next week, folks. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for dropping by today.
Hey, thanks so much, and we'll make sure to respond to every question that came in.
All right. Have a great day.